I'm Siobhan. This is my first time filming myself doing a film review, and that's because the film today, Parasite, is one that I really think requires a lot more attention than I could have done in just a paragraph or two on my film Instagram, Fuzz Film Reviews. So let's get into it. A little background on me. I am doing my PhD in environmental studies, but my master's was in English literature and film, where I looked at post-coloniality, post-humanism, and those sorts of themes carry over into my own research now in environmental studies, but also account for why I tend to choose my favorite films based on whether they deal with issues of race and culture or with what it means to be human and sort of these dealing with upending these Cartesian binaries and dissolving what human is, what animal is, what nature is, and how we think about our own class systems and hierarchical systems of organizing. So let's get into it.
뭐야, 소독해? 창문 닫아.
나도 봐. 공짜로 집안에 소독도 하고.
Bong Joon-ho's Parasite hit Canadian cinemas after winning the Palme d'Or at Cannes, which is the highest honor there, and now it's been nominated for a few Oscars, including Best Movie. It has a more widespread audience now because of its Oscar nominations, and they are in multiple categories, including cinematography and Best Director. And I'll start by saying, well, it has made the top of my Best of the Decade list and is definitely the best film I've seen in 2019. It's one that sort of starts off as a bit of a dramatic slow burn, similar to Japan's it's my cat. He knocked over his litter. Yeah, so it reminded me a little bit in theme of Japan's film Shoplifting. Okay, that was the last interruption. It reminds me a lot of the Japanese film Shoplifters, which I highly recommend. It deals with similar issues of poverty, sort of this slow burn comment on class and society. I recommend Parasite, which kind of takes similar themes and adds this incredible thriller edge to it. Let's begin with the themes of Parasite. Director Bong has a degree in sociology, which makes sense for anyone who's seen his films. He's spoken in interviews about how he will write his films sitting in coffee shop with his back to the wall, where he observes the milling about around him. He is essentially an observer of society and the neoliberal capitalist agenda that pervades it. Director Bong has said in interviews that we, quote, all live in the same country, capitalism. His films have a preoccupation with capitalism, whether it is how bodies are commodified, as in the film Okja, or in the very clear social hierarchies presented by his film Snowpiercer, which is essentially just a microcosm for the wealth gap. Now, I want to talk a little bit about Snowpiercer here because though it's a fan favorite, I don't love Snowpiercer because I'm sort of a stickler for some sorts of science fiction that I think sometimes build a little too improbable of a world, which I think Snowpiercer does. Essentially, the plot is that there's a train going around the world over and over and over on this one track, and the world outside of this train is just this post-apocalyptic Arctic tundra frozen wasteland. And on this train, at the back of the train are the poor, and at the front are the rich. And essentially, it follows this revolution from the poor back of the train pushing forward, killing anyone in their path that tries to stop them as they try to get to the helm of the train and see who is this mysterious godlike person that has determined that they are the poor and that other people can live these wealthy lives where they are forced to essentially work like slaves and animals. And what's interesting about Snowpiercer is this idea that is also explored in Parasite, which is that the rich and the poor are never that far away from each other in proximity. They might even be living in the same house as in Parasite or in the same train as in Snowpiercer. To each individual, whether it's the poor, the rich, the middle class, it seems like they're all living on their own separate planets, no matter how close they actually are. There's another sort of theme that is in both Snowpiercer and Parasite, which is that the rich have no idea the day-to-day drudgery of the poor, and that conversely there's this sort of justifiable Robin Hood logic when the poor, often the protagonists in Bong Joon-ho's films, then take advantage of the rich to make some sort of small gain, even if it's just to subsist off of something that they're leeching off of the rich. Finally, Snowpiercer draws a parallel that no doubt was brewing in director Bong's mind when he started to conceptualize Parasite, which is this idea that the poor are vermin. In Snowpiercer, and this is a small spoiler, the poor are literally fed insects that have been macerated into sort of energy bar form. The indignity and injustice felt by the revolutionaries is akin to a Soylent Green is people sort of revelation. It fuels their press forward through the upper class cars, leaving in their wake dead people who they encounter, who they feel are responsible for their own oppression, and try to achieve a sense of justice. Now, Parasite is a film, put simply, about a poor family living in a sub-basement in a slum of Seoul, and a rich family living in a contemporary architectural marvel in a rich area of Seoul. Both families are comprised of mother, father, son, daughter, and indeed these characters foil each other throughout. Essentially, the son of the poor family lies about his credentials and experience to be hired as a tutor for the rich family's daughter. As the first to infiltrate the rich family's universe, he lays the groundwork for his sister, under a different name, to be hired as the son's art teacher. Now, that's all that the trailer shows, so from here on, spoilers are abound. Now, the brother and sister remove the other hired help, the driver and the housemaid, replacing with them their own mother and father respectively, while the rich family has no idea that these hired help that they've employed are all related to each other. They are essentially con artists, to put it one way, but given that they are so poor to begin with, then what are they really conning? The chance for comfort, for sustenance and food. So the viewer probably finds it hard to condemn the fraudulence of the poor family who, like parasites, are merely surviving off of their host. There is this theme of vigilante Robin Hood, take from the rich, give to the poor justice, which I've already mentioned occurs in some of Bong Joon-ho's film, and that's no exception here. So going back a little bit to Snowpiercer, the revolution is a thrusting, violent, and heavy death count one from the outset, whereas in Parasite it is a much more sort of insidious task. Rather than overthrow an entire society, the poor family is slowly infiltrating the rich family to only take as much as they need to survive off of, essentially making them parasites by that definition. But what I think the film Parasite does is take these themes, which are you're sort of smacked over the head with in Snowpiercer, and it distills them down into a more subtle, insidious, and challenging way until it's really unclear who is the victim in this game of opportunism, when it seems that every party, rich and poor family, lose in the end. The themes of the rich-poor divide, the unseen but omnipotent puppet strings of capitalism that dictate on such arbitrary qualities as to where or into whose family one was born, who will live a life of suffering or pleasure, have rarely been so explored with elegance, humor, and horror. It is only when the poor family gets too comfortable in their situation that things start to go downhill. The rich family leaves for a camping trip, and the whole poor family moves into their glorious home while they are gone, making a mess of the place with food and jovialty, play acting, richness, and luxury. The image of them surrounded by food and their discarded garbage in the family room is strikingly like a bunch of cockroaches. Feasting in the dark, these parasite poor are essentially doing while the cat is away, the mice will play. And it is then that they hear a knock on the door, which is really the initial incident for the film, though being halfway through. Now, before I get into the climax of the film, I want to talk a bit about the homes that are shown in it. The home that the rich family lives in was built for the film and is as much a character as any other human person. It is modernist and minimalist, large and rectangular with sharp edges. The mise-en-scène here, the environment and the staging tell us superficially that this is an austere home for a prim and proper family whose lives run like clockwork. The living room has a huge floor-to-ceiling window that looks out onto the family's yard. This gives the impression of looking out onto a stage, which follows from interviews with Bong, who said that Parasite was first conceived as a stage play. For the first 2 acts of the film, the stage is the interior home, and the final act sees the action moved outside onto the lawn as the domestic horrors that have machinated indoors finally breach the interface of public and private spheres and are literally and figuratively brought to light. The house itself is filled with light and darkness, which is a metaphor that I don't really think needs explaining. Both families remark on how they value the light in the living room. The children's bedrooms are in bright tones, and the young artist's son's Basquiat reminiscent illustrations are neatly framed on the monochromatic wall next to prim and proper family portraits. While the rich family is an exercise in minimalism and monochromatism, they are not afraid to play with light and color. The poor family is heterogeneous in style, messy and undone. They stay in the shadows, often crouched together and moving together en masse like some sort of superorganism. This is in part why, at the height of the action, the knife slices and resultant splats of blood are so striking. It is as if the poor family are painting the cycles of institutionalized sickness and violence that they're constantly being churned within, represented by this blood, onto the neat monochromatism of the rich family's palette. The rich can no longer ignore the horror of the abject, the horror of the other in front of party guests. The crouched togetherness of the poor family highlights their nature as parasites, but also as a family. They love each other. They are close. They live in a cramped, claustrophobic sub-basement. When exterminators come to spray the street for bugs, they leave their windows open so that they receive free extermination, even at the cost of their health. The poor son, who is in many ways the lead protagonist of the film, since he's also the narrator, remarks throughout, quote, "This is so metaphorical." Indeed, the paralleling of the poor family with parasites takes on another dimension when you consider how often they are described by the rich family as smelling a particular unsavory way. The rich family never knows that the poor family that they've hired as individuals are related until the final act. And when the young son of the rich family smells each member of the poor family and remarks to his parents that they all smell the same, it's ironic. The father of the rich family, and essentially the breadwinner, complains to his wife about the unagreeable smell of his driver, the father of the poor family. And when he lies with his wife on the couch and remarks that when he is being driven by the poor father, that the smell permeates the back seat, that he can even smell the father when he's not there. Well, it's so ironic because the poor father is actually hiding with his children under the coffee table in front of the couch as the rich couple are speaking to each other, which accounts for the smell that the rich father smells, though he does not see his driver. Director Bong is clearly a master of dramatic irony. The conversation over the smell of Mr. Kim is mortifying to Mr. Kim to overhear, especially in front of his children. The cringing shame which permeates the scene, the sensation of overhearing oneself scolded by others as disgusting, takes on a more sinister tone when the rich husband and wife start to make love on the couch, having seemingly been turned on by this conversation about the stink of their poor hired help. What stood out to me in this scene is a motif that is present throughout the whole film, the idea of levels. While the rich husband and wife ridicule the poor family and have sexual relations about them, the poor family lay noiselessly stiff under the coffee table below them. The rich family live in a house on a hill, fortified with gates and walls, and, as it's revealed in the climax, even a panic room. The rich live in a bubble. In this opulent shelter, they are immune to climate and weather. And one of the most significant vulnerabilities for lower socioeconomic classes is exposure to the elements. Indeed, on a global scale, the poor and developing world will be the first and most severely impacted by climate change. One of the most powerful moments of the film, in my opinion, is that after the poor family escape the home of the rich family unnoticed, they find their entire neighborhood flooded, including their sub-basement home. Resigned, the sister sits on the seat of a toilet which is spewing sewage and lights a cigarette. As director Bong said in an interview about the motif of water in the film, quote, "Water always flows from the rich to the poor." The next morning, thoroughly shaken by the violence and the trauma of the night they spent trapped in a rich family's home, the father is driving the mother to pick up supplies for her son's birthday. And the rich mother remarks on how lucky it is to have had the rain the night before, the storm that destroyed the poor family's home, because now the sky is blue and it's perfect weather for a garden party. You can feel the shaking rage of the father who must take this comment in stride, and I wonder at his strength at not driving them both into an incoming lane of traffic based on her naive, optimistic obliviousness and the hopelessness of his own situation. Now, back to the motif of levels. The poor in the film are always underground. As parasites, they are associated with darkness and basements. The climax of the film occurs when the poor family is feasting at the rich family's home and there's a knock on the door. The mother, who is the only live-in help, answers while the rest of the family hides. It is the old housemaid who she replaced, standing in the rain, insisting she left something in the basement when she was fired. We return to the striking mise-en-scène of the entry to the basement, an artful shelved wall of light features and the now dark basement entryway, which in contrast looks like a dark gaping maw into the unknown, a sort of black hole which disturbs the peace and order of the world above it. And what did the old housemaid leave behind? The poor mother follows the woman down into the basement and discovers the poor older housemaid's husband. The housemaid who had come to the house, so to speak, knew of the sub-basement created for the original owner in the case of a nuclear attack. There she kept her husband for years, unbeknownst to the rich family who lived above. He could not re-enter society because he was being chased by loan sharks who threatened to kill him, so there was no retribution for him. In his bleak, gray, subterranean life, he has developed an almost religious reverence for the rich father living above, regarding him as a great, unknowing provider, sending him Morse code messages of gratitude by flicking lights on and off, which he can control from the basement. What this revelation seems to say is that there's always another, deeper level of poverty and suffering if you know where to look. It can and always does get worse. Indeed, there are two sets of parasites on the rich family who are blissfully unaware that their lifestyle supports 6 additional people. Now, that's all I have to say about the plot of the film itself. It is an expert and eloquent study in otherness and voyeurism, two themes that Hitchcock has long been associated with, which is fascinating because director Bong's style has been lauded as Hitchcockian. Indeed, director Bong says in an interview that the film he has rewatched the most is Psycho, which you can certainly see the influences of here, particularly in the way that the scenes are blocked. Scene blocking essentially refers to the way actors and objects are positioned in a scene. This is a crucial part of the mise-en-scène as it allows the viewer to focus on who the director wants you to focus on, while also highlighting who they want to fade into the background, a decision that's made purposefully, especially in films which feature this theme of voyeurism and different gazes. Parasite is abound with voyeurism, peering around corners, up and down stairways. While the poor family's home is so cramped and impoverished there's nowhere to hide, everyone is always in each other's business. The rich home has no shortage of places in which to play voyeur. The quality of the home set design is crucial to the plot since it makes it feasible that the poor family could hide and eventually escape when the rich family arrives home unexpectedly. It is also important because it highlights the shadow-dwelling presence of the poor/parasite and the obliviousness of the rich family who do not realize what's hiding around the corner and down below in their own home until it is too late. And as it turns out, both the poor family's home and neighborhood, as well as the rich family's home in the film, were actually set designed and do not exist in real life. So it is pretty expert production value there. Now, there are some incredible shots in the film from a cinematographer's standpoint. The interspersing of action scenes with the poor mother/new housemaid frantically preparing a dish for the rich family's son while an invisible timer counts down the mere minutes that the rich family will arrive home and quite possibly find these two poor families duking it out when no one is supposed to be there at all beyond the housemaid. I challenge anyone to find a more adrenaline-filled scene of noodle boiling and beef chopping where the stakes are as high as livelihoods. Life and death. A final mention, the shot of the poor family floating on the doorway, moving like a slow barge through the flooded slum, is striking. It reminds me of the flood at the beginning of Ratatouille, which I swear is related to this film. And it's the scene where the rats are escaping and ride these makeshift ships into the sewers. Rats have, of course, long been maligned as a pest and sort of parasite, and they are associated with the poor. There's even a rat, coincidentally or maybe not coincidentally, in the 1960 Korean film The Housemaid, which director Bong cites as inspiring his film Parasite. Ratatouille, not to go too far into it, is a film about, though, in one sense, the invisible labor that the most maligned and unrecognized castes of our society do to keep the whole system afloat. Or maybe it's just a film about a rat who can cook. But there is something, however, about the haphazard movement of pest-type beings, of parasite-coated individuals, this liquid fluidity and formation that hordes of cockroaches and ants and rats can take as if they're moving as a superorganism. And as the poor move through the flood, they hold their rescued dearest possessions and cling to anything for life and survival, even if the thing itself is as functionally defunct as a broken door, which is being steered onwards at the back by, presumably, their father.